Cody Brown now wants us to believe that the catfishing situation was something Meri simply brought to him. In Season 20, he delivers this version of events with the calm confidence of someone assuming no one will rewind the tape. He casts himself as the aware husband, the steady partner who saw the danger coming and tried to intervene. And if you haven't been paying close attention to sister wives over the years, you might accept that story without question. But that version only works if you ignore what came before it. Long before any fake profile appeared in Meri's inbox, the marriage was already being dismantled piece by piece. Years of emotional withdrawal. Years of withheld affection. A relationship reduced to obligation rather than intimacy. Meri didn't drift toward a stranger because her marriage was strong. She drifted because she had been left alone inside it. The public narrative paints Cody as the betrayed husband, humiliated by his wife's emotional affair. But the footage tells a different story. One that shows a woman living in isolation while her husband emotionally invested elsewhere. One that shows a marriage that had already stopped functioning in any meaningful way. Cody himself has admitted this, repeatedly, on camera. He acknowledged that their physical relationship had ended years before the catfishing. He admitted the emotional bond had faded long before 2015. Meri was still legally married, still expected to be loyal, but treated more like a tolerated housemate than a wife. So when the catfishing was exposed and Cody reacted with outrage, the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly had been betrayed? A marriage that existed in name only? A relationship he had already checked out of? Meri's loneliness didn't appear overnight. It was created gradually, through neglect that accumulated over time. And when she reached for connection, she reached blindly. The choice was disastrous, but the need behind it was real. That's where Cody's logic begins to collapse. In Season 20, he stated that if the relationship had been good, the situation could have been resolved. In saying that, he unknowingly admitted the truth. The relationship wasn't good. It was already broken. The catfishing didn't cause the fracture. It exposed it. Yet somehow, in Cody's retelling, that admission never leads back to him. The marriage was bad, but not because of his actions. The catfishing was unforgivable, but not understandable. He manages to hold both ideas at once without acknowledging the contradiction. Meri sought connection because she was deprived of it. She made a painful mistake, but the hunger that drove her there didn't come from nowhere. It was built over years by a partner who had emotionally moved on. And then there's the part of the story the show has never truly confronted. The catfisher, Jackie Overton, wasn't a random stranger orbiting the family. She was connected through a friend named Kendra, who happened to be close to Robin Brown. That connection has never been fully addressed, despite how central it is to the situation. How did Robin know details about the relationship that were meant to be private? How did she know about the messages, the gifts, the conversations? Her explanation has always been that she was trying to help, that she was protecting Meri. But Meri asked her to stop. She asked her directly to disengage from anyone connected to the situation. And according to Meri, that request was ignored. Private conversations shared only with Robin somehow found their way back to the catfisher. Information that existed in no other place. Meri has spoken about this clearly. This wasn't speculation. It was a pattern she lived through. The options are limited. Either information was being passed along knowingly, or carelessly, or through channels no one has ever bothered to explain. What matters is that it kept happening. And Cody never pushed for answers. He was too focused on defending Robin to ask how his wife's private words were being used against her. Robin's defense has always centered on intention. That she meant well. That she believed she was helping. But intention doesn't explain outcomes. And it doesn't account for the damage caused when someone refuses to step back after being asked to do so. Meri's version of events and Robin's do not align. One describes unwanted involvement that escalated the crisis. The other describes heroic concern. And over time, it became clear which version Meri believed. So where was Cody while all of this unfolded? When his wife was being manipulated, publicly humiliated, and dealing with the aftermath of her private messages being exposed, he wasn't there. Meri asked for space during the crisis. Time to process the deception, the shame, the emotional fallout. Cody later reframed that request as rejection, as proof that she pushed him away. But that framing ignores years of absence that came before it. He hadn't been emotionally present long before she asked for distance. The space already existed. She simply acknowledged it. Footage from the Vegas years shows a consistent pattern. Meri alone. Meri attempting to connect. Meri waiting for attention that never arrived. And Cody elsewhere. Always elsewhere. The catfishing should have been a moment for him to step up. To show support. To demonstrate that even if the marriage was struggling, he wouldn't abandon her at her lowest point. Instead, he used that moment as justification for further withdrawal. By season 20, Cody is fully committed to his revised history. You can see it in his confessionals. He defends Robin before anyone accuses her. He labels Meri a hypocrite without clearly defining what she contradicted. Words like betrayal and hypocrisy become shields. Tools to redirect attention. Because as long as the focus stays on Meri's failure, no one examines the environment that made it possible. Cody argues that the catfishing proves the marriage was broken. He's right. But he also argues that the catfishing is what broke it. Both cannot be true. Either the marriage was already damaged, or it wasn't. And choosing either version requires accountability he refuses to take. He has apologized for many things this season. For being harsh. For making mistakes. But there is one apology he has never offered. He has never said that his neglect played a role in Meri's loneliness. He has never acknowledged that the catfishing didn't happen to him. It happened to a woman he had already emotionally abandoned. And that omission tells you everything. Cody's current narrative depends on forgetting. Forgetting the years of distance. Forgetting the imbalance. Forgetting his role in creating the conditions that allowed a stranger to seem appealing. Meri didn't fall for a catfish because she was reckless. She fell because someone finally pretended to want her. After years of being overlooked by her husband, a fake profile offered more interest than the man she married at 19. When that lie collapsed, Cody used it as evidence that she was the problem. He rewrote the timeline. He recast himself as the victim. And is counting on the audience to forget the rest. But the footage is still there. And we're not forgetting. Cody Brown now wants to rewrite the past as if the cameras were never rolling. In season 20, he casually suggests that the catfishing situation was something Meri simply brought to him. As though he was already aware, already involved, already trying to help. He presents himself as the steady husband who saw the danger coming and stood ready to protect his marriage. And if you're only half watching, that version might sound convincing. But it falls apart the moment you remember what actually came before. Long before a fake businessman ever appeared online, the marriage was already deteriorating. Not suddenly, slowly, quietly, through years of emotional distance, withheld affection, and a growing sense that Meri no longer mattered in her own relationship. This wasn't a happy marriage disrupted by an outside threat. It was a fragile one left unattended until it cracked. The public story paints Cody as the injured party, the man betrayed by a wife who became emotionally involved with someone else. But the private reality, preserved across seasons of footage, tells a far less flattering story. One of a woman becoming increasingly isolated while her husband built a fuller, more attentive life elsewhere. Even Cody has acknowledged this on camera. He has admitted that their physical relationship had ended years before the catfishing scandal. He has admitted the emotional bond had faded long before 2015. Meri was still legally married, still expected to remain loyal, but functionally living as an afterthought. So when the catfishing finally came to light and Cody reacted with shock and outrage, the question becomes unavoidable. What exactly was Meri betraying? A marriage that existed in name only? A partnership that had already been abandoned emotionally? Meri didn't wake up one day content and fulfilled and decide to seek attention elsewhere. The loneliness didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built gradually, through neglect that piled up year after year. And when she reached for connection, she reached from a place of desperation, not deceit. That's where Cody's current narrative starts to unravel. Because the only way he remains the victim in this story is if everyone agrees to forget the years that came before the catfishing ever began. What Cody rarely acknowledges is that he has already explained the truth himself, even if he now pretends otherwise. On multiple occasions, He admitted that the intimacy in his marriage with Meri had ended years before the catfishing was exposed. Not months. Years. The emotional connection faded. The physical relationship disappeared. What remained was a marriage on paper, stripped of warmth and effort. Meri was living alone, still bound by loyalty, still expected to behave like a committed wife, while being treated as though her needs no longer mattered. And when the catfishing was revealed, Cody reacted as if something sacred had been stolen from him. But it's hard to steal something that had already been abandoned. The loneliness Meri experienced wasn't sudden or mysterious. It was the predictable result of being emotionally sidelined by a partner who had moved on while still demanding devotion. The hunger for connection that drove her toward a stranger was created over time, through silence, absence, and neglect. Then there is the part of this story the show never fully confronts. The catfisher was not an entirely disconnected outsider. Jackie Overton, the woman behind the fake identity, was linked through a mutual friend named Kendra, who was closely connected to Robin Brown. That connection has always hovered in the background, never examined, never properly questioned. How did Robin know details that were meant to be private? How did information about messages, gifts, and conversations surface before Meri had shared them widely? Robin has always said she was trying to help, that she was acting out of concern. But Meri has been clear that she asked her to stop communicating with people tied to the situation. She asked her to disengage. And according to Meri, that request was ignored. Private conversations shared only with Robin somehow found their way back to the catfisher. Information that existed nowhere else. This wasn't guesswork. It was a pattern Meri recognized while living through it. Either that information was being passed along knowingly, or carelessly, or through channels no one has ever bothered to explain. What matters is that it kept happening. And yet, Cody never demanded answers. He never pressed for clarity. Instead, he consistently positioned himself as Robin's defender, shutting down questions before they could be fully explored. His focus wasn't on how his wife was being manipulated. It was on protecting the narrative that caused the least disruption. The story begins to look very different when you stop focusing on intentions and start looking at outcomes. Because whatever Robin believed she was doing, the situation didn't improve. It escalated. Information became weaponized. Trust eroded further. And Meri was left feeling exposed rather than supported. Through all of this, Cody remained distant. Not just physically, but emotionally. While his wife was being manipulated and publicly humiliated, he was largely absent. And that absence would later be reframed as proof of Meri's betrayal, rather than what it actually was, a continuation of a pattern that had existed long before the crisis. When Meri asked for space during the fallout, it was later reframed as rejection. Cody has repeatedly pointed to that moment as proof that she pushed him away, that she chose distance over repair. But that framing only works if you ignore everything that came before it. You can't be pushed out of a marriage you stopped showing up for years earlier. By the time the catfishing became public, Cody's emotional absence was already well established. He hadn't been consistently present. He hadn't been pursuing connection. The space Meri asked for wasn't a sudden rupture. It was an acknowledgement of a distance that already existed. Footage from the Vegas years quietly documents this reality. Meri alone in her home. Meri attempting to engage. Meri waiting for attention that never comes. And Cody elsewhere, investing his energy and affection where it felt more rewarding to him. The pattern is subtle but relentless. The catfishing crisis should have been a moment for him to step forward. To show care. To offer protection. To demonstrate that even in a strained marriage, he would not abandon his wife when she was most vulnerable. Instead, he used her lowest point as justification for pulling back even further. And then came the language. Betrayal. Hypocrisy. Moral failure. These words were repeated often, but rarely examined. Because once those labels are applied, the conversation stops. If Meri is framed as the villain, no one asks how the conditions for that crisis were created in the first place. In season 20, this deflection becomes impossible to ignore. Cody rushes to defend Robin before any accusation has even been made. He shuts down questions before they can land. His priority is clear long before the interviewer finishes speaking. He knows exactly which part of the story must be protected. Calling Meri a hypocrite sounds decisive, but it doesn't actually explain anything. Hypocrisy requires contradiction. And yet, Meri never claimed to be immune to loneliness. She never pretended the marriage was thriving. What she did was exist inside a relationship that had already stopped meeting her halfway. Cody's logic loops in on itself. He argues that the catfishing proves the marriage was broken. And on that point, he's right. But he also argues that the catfishing is what broke it. Both cannot be true at the same time. And choosing either version would require him to accept responsibility for his role. If the marriage was already damaged, then someone has to answer for the years of neglect that led there. If it wasn't, then someone has to explain how a supposedly attentive husband failed to notice his wife falling into an online relationship with a stranger. Either way, the spotlight eventually turns toward him. So instead, the focus stays fixed on Meri's mistake. Because as long as the narrative centers on her failure, the deeper questions remain unanswered. And accountability remains comfortably out of reach. By Season 20, Cody has fully committed to this rewritten version of history. Every confessional shows him convinced of his own innocence, fully believing he is the wronged husband. He doesn't perform it, he genuinely believes it. The selective memory isn't a tactic anymore, it's the foundation of his identity. A marriage already broken becomes, in his retelling, proof of Meri's betrayal. The facts speak differently. A husband who withheld attention, affection, and emotional presence for years. A first wife growing increasingly isolated in her own home. A fourth wife whose social network included the very person manipulating Meri. Private information traveling in suspicious ways. And yet, Cody claims he had her back through it all, even as the evidence says otherwise. What Cody forgot is not accidental. The gaps in memory line up perfectly with the parts of the story that make him look bad. He remembers Meri's mistakes with crystal clarity. He remembers being kicked out and the request for space. But the years of neglect that led to those moments? Gone. The emotional abandonment? Erased. The environment he created that allowed a stranger to become more attentive than he ever was? Ignored. This selective narrative is essential to his role as the victim. If he remembered everything, he would have to admit the truth. The catfishing wasn't the problem. It was the symptom. A symptom of a marriage he had already abandoned emotionally, a marriage that left his wife desperate for connection. Meri fell for a catfisher not because she wanted to hurt him or rebel. She fell because someone finally paid attention to her life, someone who appeared to care, after years of being overlooked by the man she married at 19. And when that lie unraveled, Cody's response was to use it as evidence that she was the problem, that she had betrayed him, that she was morally at fault. He rewrote the timeline. He repositioned himself as the victim, Meri as the villain. And he expected the audience to forget all that came before. But the record exists. The years of absence, neglect, and isolation are there in the footage, waiting to be seen. And we are not forgetting. The full story is still visible to anyone willing to look. A marriage already broken. A wife abandoned emotionally. A catfisher who exploited that emptiness. And a husband whose narrative depends on the erasure of his own accountability. The catfishing didn't break the marriage. It revealed it. And that's the truth Cody cannot tell, the truth he can never fully admit, and the truth we will not forget.